What if Bigfoot came for you? That's coming up next right here on The Right Stuff. Hi, and welcome to The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking to my guest co-host and contributor today, Kyle Steele, who actually is Sebastian Richard. He wrote the book that we're going to be highlighting called The Siege at Simeon Heights. He thought they were only legend until they threatened his family. Like I told you before in our introduction, what if Bigfoot came for you? We'll talk about that in just a few moments. As always, I want to thank you for your support. We have been showcasing Christian authors worldwide for 10 years. As God gives us grace, we'll continue to do so. To find out how you can help out, go to patreon.com/rightstuff. To stay up to date with PJC Media, go to pjcmedia.net. Click that pink follow button. You'll never miss a show. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at PJC Media for updates, uploads, and more. Go ahead, subscribe today. Lastly, I want to thank you all for your support of my newest release, A Chance for Idoia, which is the last book of the Last Chance Bride series. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and pick up your copy exclusively at Amazon.com. And so, without further ado, I'm going to bring my guests on board. Kyle, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here with me today. I don't take it lightly, and I'm just so excited. I want to let our listeners know that Kyle is a recommendation from Jeremy and Amanda Richard. And if you've been following the show, I talked about Jeremy's book, Scarlet Thread, about a year and a half ago. And when his wife saw that I interview Christian authors, she recommended Kyle. And I have been enjoying his story, The Siege. I can't wait to tell you more about it in our conversation. I want you to peel back the veil and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my true name is Sebastian Richard. My pen name is Kyle Steele. I've been writing actively since 2017. My first little book was a Kindle book about 40 pages long. For the most part, I've been writing nonfiction. I was specializing in faith, leadership, and personal growth books. But I had this story on my heart for about 6 years because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about Bigfoot, about cryptids, about Dogman. And I had heard a story at some point in time that really shook me to my core. And I was like, man, that would make such a good movie or a good book. And I thought maybe if I fictionalized it and I put my own twist on that narrative that I had heard on the podcast, it could make for a really, really good story. But I kept it inside because I was like, no, I'm not going to write fiction. I'm not a fiction author, et cetera, et cetera. Until I kept talking about it year after year. And my wife said, why don't you do yourself a favor and write the darn thing? And so I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And it was kind of like when I began writing fiction, it was like I was giving myself a present. Because when you write nonfiction, it's fact-based. You have to back it up. You can't just assert anything and throw it out there. You always have to do your research and your homework, and it's demanding in a certain way. But when you write fiction, the pages are blank. You're definitely the author, and you guide the story where you want that story to go. And there's an excitement factor to it that's just not present when you write nonfiction. So for me, it was a whole new experience. And man, I loved every second of it, to be honest. I mean, I got better reviews, and the book was better received than my other works because I tapped into a totally different audience, cryptid lovers, outdoorsy types, those who like me, like myself, podcasts about Bigfoot and cryptids and all that. So it was a whole new genre and audience for me. And I had a really good time writing it. But I have to say, there was a learning curve because you don't write fiction the same way you write nonfiction. And for me, it was a whole new experience because, believe it or not, I think in total during my life, I've read hundreds of books, most of them nonfiction. So I had read maybe up to that point, maybe 4 or 5 fiction books in my whole life. So without going into fiction and say, okay, I'm going to immerse myself and start reading fiction, I had to learn, how do you build a story? How do you do that? How do you write that specific type of book? So there was a lot of learning curves, and it's funny because I was always on YouTube, like, how do you do this? How do you write this? Should I write a prologue? Should I write this? Should I write that? And I was always questioning where I was going and how I was going to write this book. But man, I learned a lot, and that was also fun.
Your book does not read like a debut novel because it is so well written, and the story flows easily from one chapter to the next, and you are kept in a state of suspense as you read the story, which I find incredible because my first debut novel is a Christian horror story that will not be named. My mother loves the story.
I'm sorry, it's funny.
My mother loves it.
Yes, our mom loves
it. It's your best one yet, my darling. And I said, thank you. So we'll just leave it there. I said, thank you. But she's my mother. She should like everything I write.
You bought 100 copies, I'll bet, right?
Yeah, wow, 10.
10.
10. I thoroughly am impressed with how well written it is for someone who is learning and has learned how to write fiction. What do you find the most difficult aspect when you were working on this story that you had to acclimate yourself to?
For me, it was the show don't tell aspect of I just want to tell, because when you write nonfiction, you're telling all the time. And all of a sudden I had to convey images in my readers' minds without telling. And I know that all throughout my book, I'm still telling a lot. I do show, I did develop the I don't want to call it an ability, but I've been working hard during the process of writing to show as much as I possibly could. But, at the end of the day, you can't berate yourself too much for these things, because you write the way you write. And sometimes it's perfectly fine to be telling and not showing. And other times, yeah, you want to show so that the reader has all those images in their minds. But sometimes I've read books, and because I did, out of curiosity, I bought a couple of books, one from Dean Koontz, the other one from Nicholas Sparks. I wanted to see what was out there from the best writers. And to be honest, I was reading through them. It's like, man, they're losing me. There's too much showing, and there's too much flowery. I had a hard time keeping the story, keeping on point. Where am I at? Where is this? Because when there's so much showing, you kind of lose are they on the veranda still? Are they still talking about the dress? I don't you're not too sure because there's too much, So for me, as a simplistic, because I approach it a little bit like a novice, since I'm a novice reader of novels, I'm also a novice writer, and I think it makes for an easy read. And when we were talking earlier before the show, you were mentioning that that's an easy read, not to slight the book, not to say it was written simply, but in the sense that it reads well. It's like poof, 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 poof. It follows, and you know where you're at all times. Well, that's how I write. I like knowing where I'm at when I write, but I also want to make sure that the reader knows exactly where we're at and that they can picture what I'm trying to convey. So if I'm
not still on the veranda, then, right?
If I put too much, what do you call it, frills or whatever, I know I might lose the reader, so I don't want to do that. But sometimes the temptation is there, and sometimes there's an expression in writing fiction that says "kill your darlings." When you write that beautiful prose and you're in love with it, they say that chances are the reader might not share the same sentiment, so they say "kill your darlings." But I got to be honest, I didn't kill my darlings through these books because it was my first novel. So my darlings were very precious to me, so I kept them around.
when we do what they call purple prose, which is very ornate, very florid writing. Yeah. And I struggle with this because I am a reader and I like to picture myself and immerse myself in where the story is. If you have too little description or too little lack of setting, then you can't orient the reader. Exactly. Or like you said, in your position, if you have too much of it, you're like, okay, he was talking about how beautiful the garden was, but wasn't there a dead body? Is a dead body in the violas or is it in the shrubs? You know, you're trying to figure out where you're going. So I
think it was in the Nicholas Spark novel I bought. I think it was The Choice. And at some point I had read 2 pages and I was like, what did I just read? Like, where am I? Where's the story going? Then I had to go back. Okay, that's where they are. Because it was all about the scripted this and the curtains of that and the light, the way the sun through the window, and it was just too much for me.
You know what? Give me the facts, right? You want to know what's going on, and that could be going toward your preference for nonfiction because you're reading to gain knowledge, you're reading to learn, you're reading to impart the knowledge that you learned about something with something else.
I love telling the story. Mm-hmm. For me, the story is the essence of the book. I really am passionate about telling that story because I really wanted to carry the readers with me through it, and so the telling part was hard to avoid for me.
And so, dear listener, if you were tapping into our conversation, I'm talking to Kyle Steele, aka Sebastian Richard, about his debut novel, The Siege at Simeon Heights. And if you like cryptids and you like Bigfoot and you like those odd mysteries, you're definitely going to love this one because it's based off true accounts of people who have encountered things. And that is part of the meat of the story, that even though you put it in a fictionalized way, you are recounting something that you heard. So tell us a little bit about this event.
Well, that's the thing. The crux of the story was taken, the idea for the story was taken from one particular podcast I heard years ago about a family who had to endure a similar type of siege. But a lot of the other elements of the story I built along the way based on other accounts. So when you're talking about Bigfoot, there's going to be wood knocks. There's going to be the stench. This is the stuff that comes back from one account to the next, to the next, to the next. There is a conducting a line, and they often come back. So a lot of those things come back. So I wanted to make sure they were really well portrayed in the book so that the readers not only read a great story, but they also learn about Bigfoot behavior in the process. So that's why I based it on true accounts in that sense that I wanted to bring in the description, what they look like from eyewitnesses, the stench that's pretty much described the same way from one person to the next. It smells like a rotting corpse or mixed with urine or whatever. It doesn't smell very good. They're called skunk apes in Florida for a reason, right?
Like, you definitely need a bath. You wouldn't be as terrified if you had a bath.
Oh my goodness! But I think it's their glands or something. I'm just theorizing here, but I think that they manifest that odor to let you know they're there. So
it's sort of like animals who release a scent.
Yes.
In a manner to get away predators.
Yeah.
Like, I'm coming, or to push away potential risk, like a skunk, like what a skunk would do.
Potential risk, potential intruders on their territory, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they have control over it, but that's just me. I mean, that's what I believe. So I really, the rock throwing, that's another thing I put in the story. So I don't want to sell any punches or anything. But
we don't want to do too many spoilers, but we just talking about spoilers.
It. But that's the kind of behavior that is commonly described. So when I say based on true accounts, that's the kind of stuff. And I've heard also rarely do they break in properties that are inhabited while the people are there. So if they do break in, usually the people aren't there. But I have heard a couple of instances where people were there. and it was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying.
Well, I freak out when I see a fly, so I can't imagine if I saw a cryptid. So let's talk about this word cryptid. Now, people, when I say Bigfoot, they have Harry and the Hendersons on the mind from back in the day. But when we talk about cryptid, we are talking about a specific breed of creature. Maybe. We're talking about potentially some ancient ancestor, maybe. We're talking about something that is so shrouded because the information isn't prevalent. And that's why it's cryptic, kind of based off the term cryptic.
Exactly. And cryptozoology, the word cryptic means basically hidden or shrouded in mystery, like you said. So cryptozoology is all about that, finding those animals that are not officially on record yet, that are kind of hidden from our knowledge, from our understanding.
But there's always stories, and that's the thing about stories that last, like the chupacabra, I think it is.
Chupacabra, yeah, it means the goat sucker.
Yeah,
that because this particular cryptid is thought to be a slayer of goats and lambs, and is even thought to be an animal that drinks their blood. But it's because they found the corpses of goats after a perpetrated attack from that creature, and there was pretty much drained of its blood. So that's why they called it chupacabra, which means the goat sucker.
I was watching one of those YouTube channels that talk about paranormal things. And one of the ones they show was a video of this guy with his dog. They're in the forest, and the dog went into alert. And whatever it was you saw, it was on all fours. It was massive. I mean, it was huge. And I'm sitting there going, I can't explain that away. There's no way I can explain this away. And the dog's barking. And I'm like, please get away from it, dog. Please get away from it. And the dog's like, ruff, ruff. And the dog's doing his job, though. He's doing his job. He's definitely trying to protect himself, and he's trying to protect his owner.
Yeah.
And it was stalking through the forest. Its eyes glowed, probably from the light, but it was really interesting. And there are times when, and something that happens with the family, you come face to face with something you just can't explain, and you can't explain away. What about people who have been in that position where they have seen things? And we're not talking just cryptids, but we can talk about supernatural too. They've seen things. They're terrified of talking about it. But is there a release when you stop holding it in and telling someone, even if the person doesn't believe you?
Well, that's what I find is such a blessing that we have seen a multiplication of such podcasts come out in the last 5, 7 years, 10 years that are concentrating about cryptids, the supernatural, where people can come on those podcasts and share their encounters, share their supernatural experiences, share the things that scared them to death when it happened. And I've heard that many times during these cryptid podcasts I've listened to for many, many times for many years, where you have these like huge guys, like 6'5" hunters, ex-military, who would go on a show and recall their experience when they faced Bigfoot or when they faced Dogman or when they were in that situation. And just retelling it brought them back to that moment. And some of them sobbed. Some of them, their voice was shaking and they had to apologize. They said, let me just compose myself here. I'm just kind of reliving it. I'm sorry. Big guys, like manly men, alpha male dudes, you know? And you're like, wow. Isn't it fantastic, on the one hand, to imagine the primal fear that these beings bring upon us when we encounter them, because we're not used to that. We're not expecting that. It's not a bear, and even a bear would be scared, but at least a bear, you know what you're facing. So there's that's absolutely mind-blowing. But it's a wonderful thing that there's so many of these podcasts out there where these people actually say at the end of the show, thanks for having me on. It's the closest thing to therapy I've ever had, because when I spoke about this to my friends, to my family, to my wife, to my husband, they laughed at me. They didn't believe me. They called me, drunk or whatever, and they thanked the host because they really were able to talk about it and get it off their chest. And for them, it's beneficial. Oftentimes they can move on better after that. So I think it's a wonderful thing because we have more and more of these encounters. I don't know if the veil is thinning, the supernatural, between the supernatural and the natural, and we're seeing more of those cryptids, or it's just that because we have so much access to information and people are not as shy as in the early 1900s, people talk more about these things and they're not, they just feel more comfortable, or maybe since more are coming out, more will come out and talk about it, and it creates an effect of, this is out there now, we can talk about it. I don't know if it's one or the other, but
it could be too. We can record these things too. Recently, you must have heard about what was happening in Miami, that they had this huge police presence a couple of days ago, and there's this huge police presence. We're talking 60 to 100 cars. Yeah. And you're wondering why. And so they said there were some kids fighting, but then there's this zoomed...
That made me laugh.
Yeah, but there's this zoomed in video of something walking. And I say something, and this is what irritates me to no end, is that it was so blurry you couldn't see what it was.
No, and they do that on purpose.
Yeah.
They blur it on purpose.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. So Carter in the story, who's our main character we're following through, he is dealing with his own grief, and he is now a single dad. And you find this out very early in the story. I'm not spoiling anything.
No, it's not spoilers.
Not spoiled. But actually facing these creatures, if we're going to call them that, facing these creatures can be cathartic in a way, because he's got to choose between letting the fear overtake him or take care of his family, So he's got some really serious decisions to make here. And so when you pick up your copy of The Siege at Simeon Heights, you're going to be thrown into this world of cryptids. You're going to learn a lot of information, but you're also going to have a great story.
And it's a family story as well. And that's what the thing is, that was fun to write for me, because after I ended every chapter, I would gather the kids. I have 3 children at home and my wife. And I say, okay, I'm done with another chapter. You guys want to hear it? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd get their feedback. And they just loved the story. So it's like the ideal campfire story. If you have kids, it's pretty much, I would say, maybe PG-13 or something like that. So if you can share it with your children. There's some parts that are scary for sure. I mean, we need that to keep the story enthralling. But it's a family story, first and foremost, I believe. And I got some good comments from reviewers who told me what I liked about The Siege is that it's not just monsters ripping through people or whatever. It's really a family story. There's these complex relationships. The characters are well defined, and you're really brought into the story. And I that's what I wanted to convey: a good story, not just monsters ripping through people and blood everywhere.
Which there's no problem with that, and my listeners know I'm a horror freak, so I like that.
It's a genre. I mean, and it appeals to some people, but that was not what I wanted to bring.
Well, at the core of it, you're one of the second authors or third author I've had on my show since I've been doing the show that really created the story with family involved, right? And I think that often helps the author get good feedback. And we're not talking about, oh, everything you write is perfect. No, you get really honest feedback from the people who love you the most. And I think when you have that dynamic, that's why the stories actually read so much better. Like the other author, he wrote, The Seventh Elizabeth. I can't remember the whole title, but it's called Something of the Seventh Elizabeth. He's going to kill me when he hears this, but I loved it. Mind you, I loved it, but his whole family was involved in that story. Then the guy who did another cryptid story called Momo, he's doing a movie, Kevin Kraft, he's doing a movie about it. And, the family's involved with that. Now you have a family involved story.
Yeah.
And I love seeing those be put together. I have a father-son duo who writes together, just that family dynamic. And I think what Satan does, he attacks the family. He attacks the family to keep the family from becoming the powerhouse that it is. And so when you write stories with family involved, you continue to perpetuate God's plan for humanity. And the strongest unit of society is a strong family.
Amen.
Because when you have strong families, they build strong communities. Strong communities build strong neighborhoods. Strong neighborhoods build strong cities. Strong cities build up and have good leaders. Good leaders lead responsibly. So think about this, dear listeners, you're talking about this. I know we went off tangent, but you can't help it with me. I went a little bit off tangent, but I want people, if they want to connect with some of your other work that you write under your own name of Simeon, I'm sorry, not Simeon, of Sebastian Richard, where can they find you online?
I'm very easy to find. Sebastian Richard on Amazon. You just type my name and you're going to see my books there. So yeah, I still do. I mean, I still write nonfiction, faith-based leadership. I'm writing my second leadership book. So yeah, a lot of faith-based book. I have a couple here that I brought by. I'm not going to show them, but Kingdom Fundamentals is one of a fan favorite, I guess you could say. It's all about the kingdom of God. So people, if they want to learn more about the kingdom of God, that particular topic, Kingdom Fundamentals is a book that was very appreciated by the public.
Oh, good. So we'll have you back to talk about that. We'll talk about that offline. And then what we want to do is give you an opportunity to connect with you. So they gave you Sebastian Richard. Make sure you go ahead and pick up his book. Now, you are one of my favorite type of guests, and that's the debut novelist, okay?
Oh, okay.
And in the few moments we have left, go ahead and encourage that aspiring author out there today whom God has given the gift to write to pick up the pen and do so.
I'm also an author coach. That's what some people might not know that. I coach authors. I encourage authors. I created a course also for authors for nonfiction. It's an 18-hour long course. So I know a thing or two about the fear that most debut authors have about putting themselves out there, putting pen to paper. Well, of course, not pen to paper anymore. We're typing mostly. But the fear of doing it because they overanalyze. Analyze, paralyze. Just do it. Just do it. Write the book. You have a book on your heart. You have a novel on your heart. You have a story on your heart. You have a nonfiction book, a subject that God put on your heart. Do it. Start writing and don't look back. And another thing that we tend to do is as we write, we self-edit. And then we self-edit, and then we can't get past chapter 1. Don't do that. Write. Chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then go back and start editing yourself, because otherwise you'll never be done with that. And I've known a lot of people who say, oh, I started writing a book 5 years ago. I'm still on chapter 1. Well, yes, you're going to be on chapter 1 for a long time if you keep being so self-conscious and so afraid. And that's another thing in the Christian realm, especially when it comes to nonfiction. When you present ideas, when you present concepts or theology, you're going to be judged. I mean, there's 42,000 denominations in Christianity. If you think nobody's going to judge your ideas, maybe writing's not for you. So it's going to happen. Do it anyway. Back it up with scripture, but do it. Like you want to present solid arguments. And I'm talking about nonfiction again. But as for the novel and the fiction realm, man, telling a story is so much fun. People love stories. They've loved stories for hundreds of years around campfires and so on and so forth. Movies or stories. People love movies. I mean, human beings, we love a good story. So if you have a good story, well, write it and polish it and rework it until there's no plot holes as much as possible. And then get those alpha readers, beta readers, editors, and all the people on board to help you patch everything up and make it really solid and tight. And you're going to have your book. but do it. Just do it, basically. That's what I'm encouraging new authors to do.
And I can't think of a better way to end the show today. So Kyle, Sebastian, thank you so much for being with me on the show today. Really enjoyed having you. Can't wait to have you back and have you back soon.
I appreciate being on your show, Parker. And I love the fact that you're so chatty and engaging. And I just love your personality. So you're very bubbly, and people need that in the book realm.
And we were talking today to Kyle Steele. He is the author of the book, The Siege at Simeon Heights. It is Bigfoot fiction, if you want to call it that. But it's more than just that. It's a story about a family coming together to overcome obstacles, which is something we all can relate to. You, dear listener, may be having an obstacle in your life. Is it the fear of writing your story? Is it the fear of taking that step forward? Is it the fear that people won't hear what you're saying? Is it the fear that maybe I won't ever get this done? People are going to hate it. It doesn't matter. If God has given you the gift to write, just do it, as Kyle said. So what are you waiting for? Go ahead, pick up the pen, and write stuff. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J., and you have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day.